The scout ship came out of the dark between the stars, quiet as a shadow. Its hull was the color of old iron, and it moved without sound, the way a hunting animal moves through tall grass. Inside, 3 members of the Vareth Combine sat at their stations, watching a small blue world grow larger on their screens. The ship's name was the Quiet Hand. It was not built for war. It was built for looking, for listening, for finding worlds that no one else had found yet. Its captain was called Tessic, and she had flown this kind of mission for almost 30 cycles of her home star. She had seen hundreds of worlds. Most were empty rock. Some had plants or simple animals. A few, a very few, had people. This blue world was different from the start. "Captain," said Orn, the ship's scanner officer, "I am reading signals. Radio waves, old ones and new ones." Tessic leaned forward. "New ones? Show me." The screen filled with lines and numbers. Radio towers, satellites in orbit, thousands of them, tiny metal insects circling the planet, cities glowing with light on the night side, so many lights that they looked like a second set of stars fallen onto the ground. "They have a civilization," Orn said, "a young one, by the shape of their signals. Simple broadcast radio, some digital data, weak orbital defense, if any at all. My guess is early industrial to early space age, maybe 200 years past their first flight." "Weapons?" Tessic asked. "Nothing that could touch us. A few satellites with cameras. Some old rockets in museums, from what I can tell. Their most advanced ships barely leave the atmosphere before falling back down." Tessic almost smiled. This was the easy kind of world. Frightened, technological, alone. The Combine had rules about worlds like this. Watch first, then decide. If the Combine even cared enough to come back. Most young worlds were left alone for centuries, watched from a distance, judged by patient old minds far away who had all the time given by long lives and slow-moving fleets. She had almost turned to give the order to begin standard observation when the ship's third officer spoke. His name was Duin, and he was younger than the other 2, still on his first long mission. He was in charge of deep scanning, looking not at the planet's surface, but through it, using instruments that could read the shape of stone and metal buried far below the ground. "Captain," Duin said, and his voice was strange. Not afraid, confused. "I need you to look at this." Tessic walked to his station. On his screen was a shape. It was under the sand of a great desert, the biggest and driest one on the whole planet, the one the humans, for that was the name the natives called themselves, picked up easily from their own radio broadcasts, called by a word that meant something like the Great Emptiness. The shape under the sand was not natural. It was long and smooth on some parts, and rough with strange patterns on others. It was buried deep, deeper than any building the humans could have made recently, deeper than would make sense for a young civilization. "How big is it?" Tessic asked. Duin's fingers moved across his controls. Numbers appeared. Tessic read them twice, because the first time she thought she had made a mistake. 4 kilometers, Duin said quietly. "At least 4 kilometers long, and there is more. I am reading 2 more shapes like it, in different deserts on the other side of the world, all buried, all roughly the same size, all roughly the same shape." Orn had come to stand behind them now, and even his usual calm was gone. "That is not a building," Orn said. "That is a ship, Captain. That is a ship the size of a small city." Tessic stared at the screen for a long moment. She thought of everything she knew about young worlds, about how civilizations grew, about what was normal, and what was not. None of it explained this. "How old?" she asked. Duduin ran another scan, this one slower, one that measured the way stone had settled and pressed around the buried shapes over long stretches of time. When the answer came, he read it out loud twice, as if saying it twice would make it easier to believe. "The scan says the objects have been buried for at least 11,000 years, he said. "Possibly more. The equipment has trouble measuring things this old with full confidence. But 11,000 years is the lowest number it gives me." No one spoke for a moment. On the planet below them, humans were driving cars, watching television, sending simple messages across their radio networks, completely unaware that a ship from the stars was hanging above their world, and completely unaware of what was sleeping beneath their sand. "That does not make sense," Orn finally said. 11,000 years ago, these people had no cities, no writing, even, by most standards. They were still learning to farm. How could there be ships this size, this old, buried under their own ground, and they don't even know? Maybe they do know, Tessic said. Maybe it is a secret, a weapon program, hidden from the rest of their own species. No, Duan said, still watching his screen. Look at the dust layers. Look at the erosion patterns above the burial sites. Nothing has touched these structures in thousands of years. No digging, no construction near them. Whatever put these ships here, and whoever built them, it was not the humans who are alive today. It was something long before them. Tessic felt something she had not felt in many years, of flying between stars. Real surprise. Not fear, not yet, but the deep, quiet surprise of finding something that broke all her old assumptions. Could they be from another species? She asked. Some other people who lived on this world before the humans, and died out, or left? Duan shook his head slowly. The shape of the hull, where I can read it through the sand, the proportions, the placement of what might be entry hatches, the size of the internal chambers I am guessing at from density readings, all of it matches human body size. Human height, human doorways, if that is what they are. Captain, I think these were built by humans, or by something almost exactly like them. Then how, Orn said, does a species that barely understands radio have spacefaring ancestors from 11,000 years ago? No one had an answer. Tessic ordered the ship to move higher, to a safer orbit, and to begin a full, careful, quiet study of the three buried structures. She did not send a message home yet. Something told her that this discovery needed to be understood before it was shared, because if she was right about what these buried shapes were, then every plan the Combine had for this world, every quiet assumption about a young, harmless species, might be wrong. Over the following days, the quiet hand circled the planet again and again, running scan after scan. The three buried ships were spread far apart, one under the desert in a place the humans called the Sahara, one buried beneath the sands of a desert in a place called Arabia, and the third, resting under the dry red ground of a desert the humans called the Australian outback. Each was roughly the same enormous size. Each showed the same strange, ancient signs of long sleep. Duan worked almost without rest, refining his scans, trying to learn more. Slowly, a picture began to form. The ships were not simply buried by time and sand, the way old ruins sink into soil over centuries. Something about the way the ground pressed around them, the way certain layers of rock had been shaped, suggested that the ships had been placed there on purpose, and then covered on purpose, buried deep by careful work, not by chance. Someone hid them, Dudan said one night, or what passed for night in the ship's artificial cycle, as he showed Tessic his latest results. Buried on purpose, protected, like eggs left in the ground to hatch later. Or like weapons hidden for a war that has not started yet, Orn added. Tessic looked at the images on the screen, three sleeping giants, waiting under the deserts of a world whose people did not know they were there. We need more information before we report this to the Combine, she said. If word gets out that this world holds ancient human warships, every faction in Combine space will want to come and take them for themselves. We could start a war over a planet that doesn't even know it holds a secret. Or, Duan said carefully, we could be wrong about all of it, and it is something else entirely. Old rock formations that look like ships, a trick of our instruments. Tessic looked at him. Do you believe that? Duan was quiet for a moment. No, he admitted, I don't. They kept watching. Days passed on the ship while weeks passed below on Earth, since Earth's own days were shorter and its people busy with their small, unaware lives. Tessic allowed a small landing team to gather samples from the surface, sand, rock, plant matter, always staying invisible, always staying far from cities and people, careful never to be seen. The humans below never noticed the small dark shape that sometimes crossed their night sky faster than any satellite should move, and if a few pilots or skywatchers did notice something strange, they wrote it off as imagination, or a plane, or a trick of the light. But the deeper problem remained unsolved. Why would a species with radio and cars and simple satellites have ancestors capable of building 4-kilometer ships 11,000 years ago? Species did not usually lose entire levels of civilization and then build back up from nothing. It was possible, There were old stories in the Combine's own history of empires that fell and started again, but it was rare, and it usually left some trace: legends, ruins above ground, half-remembered myths of a golden age. So Duan searched human broadcasts for exactly that: myths, old stories. Anything that hinted at a memory of the sky, of great ships, of ancestors who once flew among the stars. He found more than he expected. Nearly every human culture, in every part of the world, carried old stories of beings who came from the sky, who gave gifts of knowledge, who later left, promising to return one day. Different cultures called them different names: gods, ancestors, sky people, star children. But the shape of the stories was strangely similar across a planet full of groups who, for most of history, had barely known the others existed. They remember, Duan said, showing Tessic pages of translated text pulled from old human writings and modern human websites about ancient myths. Not clearly, not as history, but as legend, as religion. They forgot the facts, but they kept the feeling, a feeling that once, their ancestors touched the sky, and one day, something from that time would return. Tessic felt a chill she could not fully explain. "You think these ships are meant to wake up," she said slowly. "You think someone built them to sleep for a very long time, and then wake, and that the stories are humanity's own broken memory of a promise made to themselves, long ago." "I think," Duan said, "that we may be standing very close to something we do not understand yet, and that whatever it is, it was not built by accident, and it was not forgotten by accident either." Tessic gave the order to keep the mission secret a while longer. She told her crew that before any report went back to Combine Command, before any decision was made about the fate of Earth and its unaware people, they needed to understand what these sleeping ships actually were, and what, if anything, could wake them. She did not know yet that far below, in a quiet research station in the middle of that same great desert, where one of the giant ships slept, a small group of human scientists had just found something strange in their soil sensors too. A shape too large, too deep, too old to explain. And unlike the aliens circling silently above, the humans were about to start digging. Neither side knew yet how much the other would change everything. Far above the clouds, Tessic stood alone at the wide window of her small quarters, looking down at the blue and brown ball turning slowly beneath her ship. Lights blinked in cities. Storms swirled white over oceans, and under 3 patches of empty desert sand, 3 ancient shapes waited in silence, as they had waited for 11,000 years, patient as stone, patient as the slow turning of the world itself. She did not know it yet, but the waiting was almost over. In the days that followed, Tessic allowed herself to think more carefully about what kind of species she was truly looking at. She pulled up old records from her ship's library, records the Combine kept on every young world it had ever watched. Most young worlds followed a simple pattern: fire, then farming, then writing, then slow growth toward machines, and, eventually, toward space. It usually took many thousands of years, sometimes tens of thousands, and it almost never moved backward. Once a species learned to build cities, it did not usually forget how. Once it learned to write, the knowledge did not usually vanish completely. Humans broke this pattern in a way that unsettled her more the longer she studied it. Their written history, the clear and solid kind backed up by ruins and records, stretched back only a few thousand years. Before that, there was a long, dark gap where their own scholars admitted they knew very little, filled mostly with guesses and broken pieces of old bone and stone. And yet here, buried beneath their own feet, sat 3 enormous ships that could only have been built by minds far more advanced than anything in that written history. "It's like finding a locked door in a house," Duan said one day, when Tessic shared her thoughts with him, and then finding out later that someone used to live in a room behind that door, a room nobody in the house today even remembers existed. Or worse, Orn added. Like finding out the house itself was built around that room on purpose, its whole shape built to protect a secret nobody living there was ever told about. Tessic found herself returning to the human radio signals again and again, not just for information, but almost for comfort, strange as that felt. She listened to human music, simple songs about love and loss and hope, sung in dozens of languages she was only beginning to understand through the ship's translation systems. She listened to human news broadcasts, arguments about politics and weather and sports. Small everyday concerns that felt achingly familiar, despite belonging to a species she had never expected to feel any connection toward. "They argue about the strangest things," Orn said one evening, half amused, half puzzled, as the three of them listened to a recorded broadcast of two humans, debating loudly about which of their local sports teams deserved more praise. And yet listen to how much they care, how much passion they put into something so small. "Maybe that's not really so small to them," Tessic said. "Maybe caring deeply about small things, even while the rest of the universe stays hidden from them, is exactly what makes a species like this dangerous to underestimate. They care. About everything. About their sports, their music, their neighbors, their old arguments. Imagine what they might do if they ever learned to care that much about something truly large." As the days passed, Dune continued refining his scans of the three buried structures, mapping small details that had been too faint to notice at first. He found what looked like corridors, branching away from the main body of each ship, chambers that might once have held supplies, or crew quarters, or something else entirely, that his instruments could only guess at through layers of rock and sand. He found faint traces of what might have been damage on the outer hull of the structure beneath the desert called the Sahara, scorch marks, and dents that suggested this particular ship had not simply been buried peacefully, but had perhaps limped to its resting place after some kind of battle or disaster. "If that's true," Tessic said, studying the scorch patterns Dune had highlighted, "then whoever built these ships wasn't simply hiding a secret gift for the future. They were running from something, or fighting something, when they buried these vessels and went to sleep." "Running from what, though?" Orn asked. "There's no record in Combine history of any conflict involving this world, this far back. If something powerful enough to damage a ship this size existed here 11,000 years ago, wouldn't we have some record of it? Some old story passed down through other species, the way we have stories from our own oldest wars?" Nobody had an answer, and the not knowing sat uneasily with all three of them as the weeks stretched on. Tessic began keeping a private log, separate from her official reports, recording her own thoughts and questions as they came to her, half hoping that writing them down might help her see some pattern she was otherwise missing. "Day 41 of observation," she wrote one evening, sitting alone in her quarters while the ship quietly orbited the sleeping world below. "The natives call their planet Earth, a simple word that in their oldest languages seems to mean nothing more complicated than ground, or soil. It strikes me as fitting, and also as sad, that a species with such buried greatness in its own past chose, when it forgot that greatness, to name its home after nothing more than the dirt beneath its feet. I wonder what they would call it now, if they remembered everything we have found beneath their sand. I have begun to suspect that whatever built these ships did not do so in a moment of triumph, but in a moment of desperate hope, the way a person buries something valuable during a storm, trusting that calmer days will come eventually, even if they themselves do not live to see them. If I am right, then these ships are not simply weapons or treasures. They are promises, and promises once made tend to demand to be kept, whether or not the ones who made them are still alive to see it happen. It was around this time that Tessic noticed something new in the human broadcasts Dune had been quietly monitoring: chatter, still small and scattered, about strange readings coming from beneath the deserts. A university researcher here, a government scientist there. Small mentions buried in specialist journals and private messages that Dune's systems happened to catch and translate. The humans, it seemed, working entirely without any knowledge of the watching ship above them, had begun to find the very same secrets Tessic's crew had been studying for weeks. "They're getting close," Dune reported one morning, after gathering the latest fragments of chatter from a research station in the middle of the Great Northern Desert. A team led by a scientist named Amara Osei has picked up unusual readings in the ground near her station. If her equipment is even half as good as ours, she'll have a clear picture of the buried structure within days, maybe less. Tessic felt the careful, patient rhythm of her mission begin to shift beneath her, the way a person feels the ground shift slightly before a larger tremor arrives. She had spent weeks studying this world quietly from a comfortable distance, turning over questions with no urgency attached to them. That comfort, she sensed, was about to end. "Keep watching them," she told Dune. "Closely. If they get inside that ship before we understand what's waiting for them there, We may not have any warning at all before something happens that none of us can take back. Below, unaware of the small ship of quiet iron circling far above their heads, human engineers and scientists continued their slow, careful work, driven by simple curiosity and the steady human habit of digging until answers were found. None of them yet understood how many things, watching from how many directions, had already turned their full attention toward the very ground beneath their boots. Dr. Amara Ose had spent 6 years studying the desert, and in all that time, she had never seen a reading like the one on her screen. She worked for a small international research station set up in the middle of the Great Desert, the same dry, endless sea of sand that stretched across the north of the continent. Her work was simple. Most days, study underground water, study rock layers, help local governments understand where wells could be dug safely. It was quiet work, far from cities, far from attention. She liked it that way. That morning, her team had been running a routine ground survey, sending sound waves down into the earth to map the layers of rock and sand below. The same kind of survey they had run 100 times before. But this time, deep below the surface, the waves bounced back wrong. Instead of showing rock, or water, or empty space, they showed something smooth, something with straight edges, something far too large and far too regular to be natural. "Run it again," Amara said to her assistant, a young engineer named Farid. "There must be an error." Farid ran it again. The shape did not change. "It's 4 kilometers long," Farid said, his voice shaking slightly. "Dr. Ose, this can't be right. Nothing that big and that shaped is supposed to be under the sand. Not here. Not anywhere." Amara stared at the screen for a long time. She had read enough about the deep history of the desert to know that the ground below had been mostly stable for tens of thousands of years, aside from slow shifts of sand across the surface. Nothing recent had built anything down there. And yet, here it was, a long, smooth shape, buried far below where the oldest human ruins in the region had ever been found. "Send this to the university," Amara said, "and send it to me on a private copy too. I want to look at this more carefully before anyone gets excited or scared." But it was already too late to keep it quiet for long. Word moved fast in the small world of desert researchers, and within days, more teams arrived with better equipment, some from universities, some quietly sent by governments who did not want to say too much about why they were interested. Nobody used the word spaceship out loud, not yet, but the shape kept getting clearer with every new scan, and it did not look like a building, or a rock formation, or a buried river channel. It looked like something built, something with purpose. Amara found herself at the center of a growing storm of attention she had never asked for. Scientists, then soldiers, then government officials began showing up at her small station, asking questions, taking her data, telling her to keep quiet while they figured out what to do. She did what she always did when the world became too loud. She went back to the data. Working late one night with Farid and a small trusted team, she ran the deepest scan yet, one that could measure not just the shape of the buried structure, but small differences in its material, comparing it against known types of metal and stone. "It's not natural rock," Farid said, reading the results. "The scan says this thing is made of some kind of metal alloy, but one that doesn't match anything in our records. It's old, Dr. Ose, really old. The layers of soil that settled around it after it was buried, my model puts it at somewhere between 10 and 12,000 years. Amara sat back in her chair. 12,000 years. That was before farming had spread across most of the world, before writing, before cities, before almost everything that people called civilization. "That's impossible," she said quietly, more to herself than to Farid. "There is no record of anyone on this planet who could have built something like this back then. Maybe there's no record because whoever built it didn't survive to write anything down," Farid said. "Or maybe," he added, more quietly, "there is a record, and we've just been calling it something else. Myths, legends." Amara thought of the old stories her grandmother used to tell her as a child, stories of ancestors who came from the stars, who slept beneath the earth, waiting for a sign to wake. She had always thought of them as beautiful old tales, nothing more. Now, staring at the scan on her screen, she was not so sure. The research station soon stopped being simply a research station. Within 2 weeks, tents and vehicles filled the area around it. Soldiers stood guard at a perimeter that grew wider every few days, and Amara found herself reporting not to her university, but to a joint task force made up of officials from several countries, all trying to decide, quietly and carefully, what to do about the enormous buried object under their shared desert. She learned, during one tense late-night meeting, that hers was not the only site. 2 more had been found, one under another desert far across the world, one under the dry red land of a different continent entirely. 3 buried objects, roughly the same size, roughly the same age. It was too much of a pattern to be an accident. "We need to know what's inside," said one of the officials, a stern man from a national security agency, who introduced himself only by his title. "Before we decide anything, we need eyes inside that structure." "That could be dangerous," Amara said. "We don't know what it is. It could be unstable. It could be something that should stay buried." "It could also be the most important discovery in human history," the official answered. "We are not going to leave it in the ground out of fear." Amara did not like his tone, but she understood the pressure behind it. Every government involved wanted answers, and every government was afraid some other government would get those answers first. The first careful drilling began a few days later, guided by Amara's team, using slow, cautious methods meant to avoid damaging whatever lay below. It took nearly 3 weeks of steady work before the drill reached the outer surface of the buried object, a smooth, dark metal wall unlike anything in any human record. When the drill finally touched it, something strange happened. The metal, which had shown no reaction to anything for 11,000 years, seemed to respond. A faint light, deep blue, pulsed once along a seam in the metal, then faded. Sensors at the drilling site recorded a small burst of energy, gone as quickly as it appeared. "It's active," Farid said, staring at his readings in disbelief. "Dr. Osei, something in there just woke up, even if only a little." Amara felt a chill run through her. 11,000 years of silence, and one touch from a human drill had been enough to stir something inside. High above, aboard the Quiet Hand, Tessic and her crew watched the same event happen through their own instruments, and their reaction was just as sharp. "Energy spike detected at the northern burial site," Orn reported, his voice tight. "Small, but real. Something inside that structure just activated, even if briefly." Tessic moved quickly to the display. "Cause?" "Human drilling equipment made contact with the outer hull," Dewan said. "They are trying to get inside it, Captain. They found it on their own, without any help from us, and now they are digging toward it." Tessic felt the weight of the moment settle on her. What had been a quiet, careful study from orbit was about to become something far more urgent. Because if the humans succeeded in opening that ship, and if whatever was inside was even a small part as powerful as the size of the vessel suggested, then everything about this world's future, and the Combine's plans for it, could change in a matter of days. She sent, for the first time since arriving, a coded message back toward Combine space, marked for the attention of the Exploration Council alone. It was short and careful, but it could not be avoided any longer. World designated Sol 3. Native species, early industrial to early space age, technologically weak. However, deep scans confirm 3 buried structures of enormous size, confirmed as constructed vessels, age estimated at minimum 11,000 years, origin apparently linked to the native species' own distant ancestors. One structure now shows signs of internal activation following native contact. Recommend immediate further study before any decision on contact or claim. This world may not be as simple as first believed. The message would take time to reach Combine space, and more time still for any answer to return. In the meantime, Tessic knew, events on the ground below would not wait politely for permission. Back at the desert site, Amara stood at the edge of the drilling pit, watching engineers lower careful instruments down toward the newly exposed metal surface. The blue light had not appeared again since that first pulse, but everyone at the site felt the same nervous energy, the sense that they were standing at the edge of something far larger than themselves. "Dr. Osei," Farid said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "If this really is a ship built by people who lived here 11,000 years ago, what happened to them? Why is there no other trace of them anywhere? No cities, no other ruins, nothing in the old bones we've dug up from that time?" Amara had been asking herself the same question for days. "Maybe they left," she said slowly. Maybe most of them went somewhere else, and only left these ships behind, hidden, waiting. Waiting for what? Amara looked down into the dark pit, toward the faint outline of ancient metal far below. Maybe, she said, waiting for us to be ready to need them. That night, a message reached Amara's station, from a general, overseeing the Joint Task Force, and it changed the shape of everything that followed. Satellite images had picked up something new, a small, dark object in high orbit, moving in ways no known satellite or space station should move, hovering quietly above the very deserts where the buried ships had been found. "We are not alone up there," the general said grimly during the emergency briefing that followed. "Something has been watching us. We believe it has been here for weeks, maybe longer." Amara felt the fear in the room grow heavier, but underneath her own fear, she felt something else too. A strange, stubborn hope. If ancient ships slept beneath the desert, waiting, and if something from beyond their world was already watching, then perhaps the old stories her grandmother told her were not simply comforting myths after all. Perhaps they were memory, buried as deep and as long as the ships themselves, waiting for the right moment to wake. She did not know that above her, aboard a ship of quiet iron, 3 aliens were staring down at her own drilling site, with the same growing sense that the safe, simple assumptions they had carried into this system were falling apart, piece by piece, the deeper they looked. Both sides, human and alien, were beginning to understand the same hard truth. Something ancient and enormous was stirring beneath the sand, and neither side fully understood what it would mean when it finally, fully woke. In the weeks after the first blue pulse of light, life at the Desert Research Station changed almost beyond recognition. What had once been a small, quiet outpost of tents and simple equipment became a sprawling camp of soldiers, scientists, and officials from more than a dozen countries, all crowded together under a harsh desert sun, all trying to work together, despite years of old distrust between their governments. Amara found the whole situation strange and exhausting in equal measure. She had spent her career studying rock and water, not politics, and now she found herself constantly pulled into meetings where generals and diplomats argued over who should control access to the site, who should be allowed to lead the investigation, and who should get to announce the discovery to the wider world, if it was announced at all. "They're treating this like a piece of land to be claimed," she said one night to Farid, as the two of them sat outside her tent, watching the stars appear over the dark shape of the excavation site. "Like it's oil, or gold, something to be fought over and divided up. Nobody seems to be asking the only question that actually matters." "Which is?" Farid asked. "What is it, really?" Amara said. "Not who gets to own it, what it actually is, and why it's here, and what it means that people my grandmother would call my ancestors apparently built something like this, 11,000 years before anyone thought that was possible." Farid was quiet for a moment, turning a small rock over in his hands, a habit he had picked up from years of field work. "Maybe those two questions aren't as separate as you think," he finally said. "Maybe understanding what it is will end up telling us exactly why people are so eager to control it." As the excavation deepened, life at the site fell into an uneasy rhythm. During the day, engineers worked carefully around the newly exposed section of hull, running tests, taking samples, documenting everything in exhausting detail. At night, Amara often found herself unable to sleep, walking instead along the edge of the growing pit, staring down into the darkness where the ancient metal disappeared into deeper shadow, wondering what waited further below. One such night, she was joined by Reuben, the older engineer who had spent decades before this discovery studying ruins far less strange than this one. "You know," he said, standing beside her at the edge of the pit, "I used to dig up old walls and broken pots for a living. Spent 30 years learning to read the small clues people leave behind without meaning to. A chip in a bowl, a worn spot on a doorstep, small signs of ordinary lives lived a long time ago. This," he gestured toward the vast metal shape below them, "this is nothing like that. This isn't small. This isn't ordinary. Whatever built this wasn't living an ordinary life at all." "Does that scare you?" Amara asked. Reuben considered the question seriously before answering. "A little," he admitted, "but it also makes me feel something I haven't felt in a long time doing this work. Wonder, maybe. Real wonder, the kind you feel as a child before you learn to be careful about believing in things too big to easily explain." Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from further down the excavation, one of the younger engineers waving urgently for Amara to come look at something. She hurried over, Reuben close behind, to find a small crowd gathered around one of the monitoring stations, staring at a new set of readings that had just come through. "There's a second reaction," the engineer said, pointing at a graph showing a small but clear spike in energy. "Smaller than the first one, but it's not random. It's happening in a pattern, almost like a heartbeat, slow and steady, getting very slightly stronger each time." Amara studied the graph carefully, feeling a chill despite the warm desert night. A heartbeat. The word felt uncomfortably fitting. Whatever slept beneath the sand was not simply a machine reacting mechanically to outside contact. It was behaving, more and more, like something alive, or something built so carefully to imitate life, that the difference barely mattered anymore. News of the growing activity reached the Joint Task Force overnight, and by morning, Amara found herself standing before a room full of tense officials once again, explaining what her team had found in language simple enough for people without scientific backgrounds to understand. "It's reacting to us," she said, slowly, carefully, almost cautiously, the way you might approach a wild animal you're not sure will bite. "Every time we get closer, every time our equipment makes contact with the hull, we get a small response. I don't think it's a threat. I think it's closer to recognition." "Recognition of what?" asked the stern security official, who had first pushed for aggressive drilling. Amara hesitated, aware of how strange her next words would sound in a room full of soldiers and diplomats. "Of us," she said simply. "I think, somehow, after 11,000 years, it's recognizing us as the people it was built for." The room fell silent for a long moment, officials exchanging uneasy glances, unsure how seriously to take a claim that belonged more comfortably in an old myth than in a modern briefing room. But nobody laughed, and nobody dismissed it outright either, because everyone present had seen the strange blue light pulse from ancient, untouched metal, and nobody could offer a better explanation. It was around this time that satellite operators first noticed the odd, hovering object above the desert, the same small dark shape Tessik's ship represented, though of course, none of them yet knew its true nature. At first, reports were vague and easily dismissed, a strange reflection, a sensor glitch, perhaps a new experimental aircraft from some other country testing stealth technology nobody had officially announced. But as more satellites picked up the same faint shape, moving in ways no known aircraft or satellite should move, the vague unease at the research station deepened into something closer to real fear. "We're being watched," the security official said grimly, once the pattern of sightings became impossible to explain away. "Whatever is out there, it's been here a while, long enough to study us closely, without ever showing itself." Amara thought of the warm, easy human songs she sometimes hummed to herself while working late, songs about love and hope and small daily troubles, and wondered, with a strange shiver, whether whatever watched from above had ever happened to hear them too, and what such a listener might have thought, hearing a species so small and unaware sing so easily about hope, in the face of a universe it barely understood. She did not know, of course, that far above her, aboard a quiet ship of dark iron, an alien captain named Tessik had indeed listened to exactly those songs, many times over, turning them over in her mind, the same way Amara now turned over the mystery of the ship sleeping beneath her own feet. Both women, separated by an impossible gap of species and distance, found themselves asking strikingly similar questions. What does it mean to be small, and unaware, and yet somehow, quietly, far stronger than anyone, including yourself, ever expected? Neither had an answer yet. But both, in their own way, were about to find out. The message from Tessik reached Combine space many weeks later, carried faster than light through the dark by a relay chain built for exactly this purpose. By the time it arrived, it had already grown into something bigger than a simple report. Copies had been made, forwarded, discussed, and argued over by officers who had never seen Earth and never would, but who understood at once what ancient buried warships, possibly still active, could mean. Within the Combine, there were many factions, and not all of them thought alike. The Exploration Council, cautious and slow, wanted more study before any action. But another group, older and more impatient, saw the report differently. They were called the Ashcrest Fleet, a a military branch that had grown tired of watching young worlds be studied for decades, while other powers in the wider galaxy grew stronger. To the Ashcrest commanders, a weak, unaware world sitting on top of powerful ancient technology was not a mystery to be studied carefully. It was an opportunity to be taken quickly, before anyone else could take it first. Admiral Kalen Voss, of the Ashcrest fleet, read Tessik's report twice, then called his officers together. A young species, barely past its first steps into space, sitting on top of warships from a lost age, he said, standing before a star map that showed the small, unremarkable dot marked Sol 3. If those ships can be recovered and repaired, they belong to whoever claims them first. We are not going to let the Exploration Council spend 40 years writing reports while some other power in this galaxy learns what we already know. One of his officers, a cautious woman named Sorel, raised a concern. Admiral, the scout captain's report said the technology might still be active. If it is defended in ways we don't understand, moving in with force could be dangerous. Then we move in carefully, Voss said. But we move in. I will not lose this to hesitation. Without waiting for full approval from the Exploration Council, Voss gathered a strike group. 5 armed ships, small by Combine standards, but each one carrying more firepower than all of Earth's combined militaries, and set a course for Sol 3. Aboard the Quiet Hand. Still quietly circling Earth, Tessik received the news of the approaching fleet with a cold, sinking feeling. They're not waiting for the Council's decision, Orn said, reading the incoming fleet data. Voss is bringing warships. He means to take the buried structures by force, whether the humans agree or not. That's 5 armed vessels against a species that barely has satellites, Duan said quietly. It won't even be a fight. It will be a slaughter, if it comes to that. Tessik felt torn in a way she had rarely felt during her long career. Her duty was to the Combine, to report and observe, not to interfere. But something about watching this small, unaware species from above for so many weeks, watching their cities light up at night, listening to their radio broadcasts full of music and arguments and laughter, learning their strange, half-remembered myths of star people who once walked among them, had changed something in her. We can't stop an entire strike group, she said finally, but we can warn the humans. Give them time to prepare, even if a little time is all we can offer. It was against protocol. It was, by any strict reading of Combine law, close to treason. But Tessik gave the order anyway, and Duan began working out how to send a message the humans could actually understand and believe, using their own radio frequencies, translated as carefully as their systems allowed. Down at the Desert Research Station, Amara Osei was in the middle of another long night of work when the strange transmission came through, breaking into a military communication channel with a burst of oddly formatted signal that took engineers almost an hour to translate into readable language. When they finally did, the message was short, and it chilled everyone who read it. Warning: armed vessels from beyond your system are approaching. Estimated arrival, 12 days. Their intention is to seize the buried structures beneath your deserts by force. You are not prepared to resist them. Prepare what defenses you can. This message is sent at great risk. Use the time given. There was no signature, no explanation of who had sent it or why. For a full day, many officials refused to believe it was real, certain it was some kind of trick, or a mistake, or a test from a rival nation. But orbital telescopes soon confirmed the truth, in the worst way possible. 5 new objects, moving in from beyond the edge of the solar system, far too fast and far too organized to be anything natural. Panic came first. Then, slowly, something else took its place. A strange, stubborn determination that spread through every government, every military, every ordinary person who heard the news once it could no longer be kept secret. Humanity had spent so much of its history divided, fighting itself over small pieces of land and old grudges. Now, faced with something too big and too strange to fight over among themselves, an odd kind of unity began to form, born not from peace, but from fear of a much larger danger. Amara found herself pulled deeper into the effort than she ever expected. With the alien fleet only days away, the Joint Task Force gave up on caution and pushed the excavation of the buried ship into overdrive. Drilling crews worked around the clock. Engineers built larger openings down toward the ancient hull. And slowly, carefully, Human hands finally broke through into the outer layers of a structure that had slept undisturbed for 11,000 years. What they found inside stunned even the most prepared scientists. Long, dark corridors stretched away into the ship's interior, lit faintly by strips of pale light that flickered weakly to life as human explorers moved past them, as if the ship itself were slowly waking from a long sleep at the mere presence of people walking its halls. The walls were covered in patterns that were not quite writing and not quite art, symbols that stirred a strange, distant familiarity in anyone who looked at them for too long, as though some old, buried part of the human mind almost recognized them. Deep inside, Amara's team found a chamber unlike anything else in the ship, a wide, round room filled with rows of long, clear containers, each one large enough to hold a human body. Most were empty, long since opened or emptied by time. But a small number, perhaps a dozen, still held shapes inside them, pale and still, resting in some kind of preserving fluid that had not evaporated in 11,000 years. "They're people," Farid whispered, staring through the clear covering at one of the still shapes inside. "Dr. Osei, I think these are actual human beings." Careful medical scans confirmed it. The bodies inside the remaining containers were human, biologically identical to any person walking the streets of any modern city, and yet somehow, they had rested here, preserved, untouched by decay, for over 11,000 years. "Sleepers," Amara said softly, the word coming to her almost without thought, as though some part of her had always known this word belonged here. This wasn't just a ship, it was a way to survive something, a long journey, or a long wait. As word of the discovery spread through the Joint Task Force, urgent decisions had to be made. Should they try to wake the sleepers? Was it even possible, after so much time? And if it was, would the people who woke understand anything about the modern world they had slept through, or would they wake as strangers in their own species' distant future? There was no time to decide slowly. The alien fleet was closing in, and every day brought them closer to Earth's orbit. High above, Tessic watched both the human excavation and the approaching Ashcrest strike group with growing unease. She had expected her warning to buy the humans time to hide, to run, perhaps to prepare some desperate, doomed defense. She had not expected them to break into the ship itself and find living people still sleeping inside. "Captain," Duan said, staring at his own scans of the awakening structure. "The ship is responding more strongly now. Power readings are climbing. Whatever system controls this vessel, it seems to be reacting to the humans' presence inside it, almost like it recognizes them as something it has been waiting for. Waiting for its own people to come home," Tessic murmured. Orn looked up from his console, his expression tense. "Captain, the Ashcrest fleet has picked up the same power readings we have. Admiral Voss knows the structure is more active than expected. His ships are increasing speed. He wants to arrive before the humans can access anything useful." Tessic closed her eyes briefly, weighing what little power she had against the size of the coming storm. Her single scout ship could not fight 5 armed Ashcrest vessels. She could not stop what was coming. All she could do was watch, and perhaps, if the moment came, offer whatever small help remained within her reach. Down on Earth, in the deep chamber beneath the desert, Amara Osei stood before the row of sleeping figures, her hand resting lightly on the cool surface of one clear container, looking into the calm, still face of a woman who had been asleep since a time before written history began. "We don't have much time," she said quietly to the small group of scientists and engineers gathered around her. "Whatever is coming, it's coming soon. We need to decide, now, whether we try to wake them, or whether we wait, and hope we survive long enough to try later." An old engineer beside her, a quiet man named Reuben, who had spent his whole career studying ancient ruins, before this discovery pulled him into something far stranger, looked at the sleeping woman for a long moment before speaking. "I don't think it's really our choice anymore," he said. "Look at the lights. Look at the power readings. I think this ship has already decided. I think it's been waiting 11,000 years for exactly this moment, and now that we're here, it's starting to wake up on its own." As if in answer, deep beneath their feet, a low sound rolled through the ship's ancient corridors, a sound none of them had words for, not mechanical, not natural, something in between, like a great creature stirring after a very long sleep. Far above, sensors on both the human satellites and Tessik's quiet scout ship registered the same thing at almost the same instant. A massive surge of energy, rising from deep within the Earth itself, not just from the one buried ship beneath the desert, but faintly, unmistakably, echoing from the other two buried structures on opposite sides of the world as well. Something ancient, long asleep, had begun, at last, to stir. And far out past the edge of the solar system, 5 armed alien warships pressed forward through the dark, utterly unaware of exactly how much they were about to underestimate the small blue world they were racing toward. In the days after Tessik's warning reached Earth, the world's response moved faster than anyone, human or alien, had thought possible. Old rivalries did not vanish completely. Old habits rarely do. But for the first time in living memory, nations set aside decades of suspicion, long enough to share information freely, to move soldiers and equipment across borders, without argument, to treat a shared threat as more important than old scores. Military leaders from countries that had spent years distrusting one another now sat together in hastily arranged command centers, staring at the same star charts, tracking the same 5 incoming ships. Soldiers who barely spoke each other's languages found themselves guarding the same excavation sites side by side, united by fear of something far larger than any conflict that had divided them before. Amara watched this strange, sudden unity with a complicated mixture of hope and sadness. "It shouldn't take something like this," she said quietly to Farid one evening, watching soldiers from 3 different nations working together to reinforce the site's perimeter. "It shouldn't take an alien fleet to make people finally start working together properly." "Maybe not," Farid said. "But maybe it's better late than never. Maybe this is exactly the moment we needed, even if none of us would have chosen it." Meanwhile, deep inside the awakening ship, the strange, slow heartbeat of energy Amara's team had first detected grew steadily stronger with each passing day. Scientists working inside the structure, protected by careful safety protocols and constant monitoring, began to map more of its interior, finding rooms whose purpose they could only guess at, wide chambers lined with unfamiliar machinery, narrow corridors that seemed built for movement rather than storage, and, most strikingly, a large central hall, whose walls were covered with the strange half-familiar symbols Dune had noticed from orbit weeks earlier. "They're not random patterns," said a linguist brought in specially to study them, a careful woman named Priya, who had spent her career studying the roots of ancient human languages. "Look at the repetition here, the way certain shapes recur in slightly different combinations. This is a written language, or something very close to one. I think, if we had more time, we could begin translating it." Time, unfortunately, was the one thing in short supply. With the alien fleet drawing closer every day, the Joint Task Force pushed the investigation forward at a pace that left little room for careful, patient scholarship. Priya and her small team worked around the clock anyway, comparing the strange symbols against every human language and myth they could find, searching for any thread of connection. She found more than she expected. Buried deep within some of the world's oldest religious texts and oral traditions, stories passed down for so many generations that their original source had long been forgotten. She found phrases and concepts that seemed to echo, faintly but unmistakably, patterns found in the ship's ancient writing. Words for the sleeping ones, for the long watch, for the promise kept beneath the ground. None of it was exact. Language changes too much over thousands of years for anything to survive perfectly intact. But the echoes were there, persistent and strange, as though some deep, buried memory had survived in fragments across every culture on Earth, waiting patiently for someone to notice the pattern. "It's like the whole species has been quietly repeating the same story to itself for thousands of years," Priya told Amara, showing her pages of careful comparison work, without ever fully realizing it was more than a story. Above them, the pressure of the approaching fleet grew heavier with each passing day. Reports from telescopes and orbital sensors tracked the 5 Ashcrest ships steadily, watching their formation, their speed, their unmistakable path toward Earth. Military planners across the world worked desperately to prepare whatever defenses they could, knowing full well how little their weapons could do against ships built to cross the empty dark between stars. "We have nothing that can touch them," a tired general admitted during one late-night briefing, standing before a room of exhausted officials. "Our best missiles, our best aircraft, None of it was built with anything like this in mind. If those ships decide to attack directly, rather than simply trying to seize the buried structures, there is very little we can do to stop them. It was a grim truth that hung over every meeting, every decision made in those final days before the fleet's arrival. And yet, beneath that grim truth, something else was growing steadily stronger. The ancient ship itself, waking more fully with each passing hour, its strange heartbeat of energy deepening into something that felt, more and more, like readiness, rather than mere reaction. On the 11th day, with the alien fleet less than a day from arrival, Amara stood once more before the row of clear containers holding the ancient sleepers, watching their slow, steady breathing, their calm, still faces, wondering whether any of them would wake before the fleet arrived, and if they did, whether they would wake in time to help, or simply in time to witness whatever came next. Reuben stood beside her, quiet for once, his usual calm shaken by the weight of the coming hour. "Do you think there'll be enough?" he asked. "Whatever this ship can do, whatever these people once built, do you think it will really be enough to stop 5 warships from another star?" Amara thought of the strange, steady heartbeat of energy rising from the ground beneath their feet, of the old stories Priya had traced through every culture on Earth, of a promise made 11,000 years ago, and somehow, impossibly, still being kept. "I don't know," she admitted honestly, "but I think, whatever happens tomorrow, we're not facing it as unprepared as we were 12 days ago, and that has to count for something." That night, for the first time since the excavation began, Amara allowed herself a few hours of real sleep, exhausted past the point of worry, and dreamed, strangely, of a woman standing on a hill of dry red earth, looking up at a dark sky filled with unfamiliar lights, unafraid. She did not know, when she woke the next morning to the sound of alarms and shouted orders, that the fleet had finally arrived, and that everything she had worked toward for the past 12 days was about to be tested in the worst possible way. 12 days passed like a held breath. Across the world, governments that had spent decades arguing over borders and trade and old grudges found themselves working side by side, sharing information, moving soldiers and equipment toward the 3 desert sites where the ancient ships slept. There was no time left for pride. The alien fleet was coming, and everyone now understood, in the same cold, sudden way, how small and unprepared their world truly was, against something built to cross the stars. Amara Ose barely slept during those final days. The ship beneath the desert had grown steadily more active, its corridors brighter, its low hum deeper, as though it were slowly remembering how to breathe. The sleeping figures in their clear containers had not woken, not yet, but medical scans showed their bodies beginning to change in small ways, hearts beating slightly faster, brain activity rising from stillness toward something closer to dreaming. "It's preparing them," Reuben said one evening, watching the readings with tired eyes. "Whatever this thing is, it's not just waking up, it's waking them up too. Slowly, carefully, like it doesn't want to shock them back into a world after 11,000 years all at once." Amara nodded, though her mind was elsewhere, running again and again through the same fear. Even if these ancient sleepers woke, even if the great ships themselves somehow stirred to life, would any of it be enough against armed vessels crossing the dark toward them at speeds no human engineer could match? On the 12th day, the answer to that fear arrived in the sky. Telescopes and orbital sensors around the world tracked the 5 Ashcrest ships as they entered the solar system properly, slowing from their long journey, arranging themselves into a loose formation as they approached Earth. To human eyes, they were terrifying, sleek, dark shapes, far larger than anything humanity had ever built to fly, each one glowing faintly with heat from engines that bent the light strangely around them. Aboard the lead ship, Admiral Voss studied the scans of Earth's growing energy signatures, with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "The structures are more active than the Scouts' early reports suggested," Sorel told him, reading the updated data. "Power output has increased sharply in the last 2 days. Whatever is happening down there, it is accelerating." "It changes nothing," Voss said. "We move in, we secure the sites, and we take control of whatever technology is down there before it becomes a problem, instead of a prize. This species has no fleet, no orbital weapons capable of touching us. There is nothing to stop us." He gave the order to begin descent toward the atmosphere, aiming his ships toward the 3 desert regions where the ancient vessels lay. What happened next surprised everyone, human and alien alike. As the Ashcrest ships entered Earth's upper atmosphere, the ground below the three deserts trembled, not with an ordinary earthquake, but with something deeper, more deliberate, as though something enormous were finally finishing a very long, very patient task. Sand shifted and slid away in huge waves across all three sites at once, uncovering more and more of each ancient hull, revealing shapes far larger than even the deepest scans had suggested. Then, in the same instant across all three deserts, the ships opened their eyes. That was the phrase Amara would use later, when there were no better words to describe it. Long, dark seams along each enormous hull glowed with soft blue light, and low humming sounds rolled outward across the land, felt as much as heard, vibrating through the ground and up through the soles of every boot standing nearby. Inside the ship beneath her own desert, Amara watched in stunned silence as the clear containers holding the ancient sleepers finally opened, releasing a soft mist that cleared to reveal each figure taking their first real breath in 11,000 years. Eyes opened. Chests rose and fell. Around the chamber, humans in modern clothing stared at humans from an age so distant it had become myth, and for a long, strange moment, nobody moved at all. The first sleeper to speak was the woman Amara had stood beside for so many nights. Her voice was rough, unused for longer than any word could properly describe, but her eyes were sharp, clear, and startlingly calm, as though she had expected this moment for a very long time, even in her sleep. "How long?" the woman asked, in a language that startled the translation equipment scientists had hurriedly prepared, an ancient tongue no living human spoke, yet one the machines managed, slowly, to piece together. 11,000 years, Amara answered, her voice shaking. "Maybe more." The woman closed her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the weight of that number, then opened them again, steady and clear. "Then it is later than we hoped," she said, "but not too late. Is the sky clear, or have they finally come?" "They're here," Amara said. "Ships, from beyond our system, coming to take whatever this is by force." The woman's expression did not show fear. If anything, something like grim readiness settled over her features. "Then we are exactly on time," she said. "Help me up. There is work to do, and very little time to do it." High above, the Ashcrest fleet's confidence began to crack as their sensors picked up the sudden, massive surge of energy rising from all three Earth sites at once, far beyond anything their earlier scans had predicted. "Admiral," Cyril said sharply, "power output from the buried structures has increased by a factor of thousands in the last few minutes. I am also detecting new energy fields forming around the ships. Something like shielding, but on a scale I have never seen a species this young produce." "Ignore it," Voss snapped, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "We continue the approach. Whatever old defenses they have left, they cannot possibly still function after so long buried." He was wrong, and within minutes, he learned exactly how wrong. As the lead Ashcrest ship descended toward the desert holding Amara's site, a column of pale light rose from the awakening structure below, faster than any of the crew could react, striking the underside of the alien vessel with a force that sent it tumbling sideways, alarms screaming through its corridors, as systems failed one after another. "Status!" Voss shouted, gripping the arms of his command chair, as his own ship shook from the shockwave of the strike on its sister vessel. "Shields on the lead ship at 40% and falling," Sorel reported, disbelief clear in her voice. "Admiral, that strike came from the buried structure itself. It's fully active. It's defending itself, and it is far stronger than anything in our threat models for a world at this technological level." Voss stared at his screens, watching as more pale light gathered along the newly exposed hulls of all three ancient ships, energy building steadily, as though each vessel were, after 11,000 years, finally remembering exactly what it had been built to do. Aboard the Quiet Hand. Tessic watched the unfolding battle with a strange mixture of fear and something close to awe. "They're not just defending the ships," Duan said, reading rapid streams of data pouring from every sensor the scout vessel carried. "Captain, look at the deeper energy patterns. This isn't only a defense system. It's connected to something far larger. I think it's connected to the planet itself." Tessic moved quickly to his station, studying the readings herself. Beneath the surface of the Earth, far below even the buried ships, Something vast was drawing power. Vast lines of energy running through deep layers of rock, gathering toward points beneath each of the three ancient vessels, as though the ships themselves were merely three small switches attached to something far larger hidden within the planet's core. That's not possible, Orn said, staring at the same data. Nothing modifies an entire planet's internal structure. Not even the oldest empires we know of have technology on that scale. Someone did. Here. A very long time ago, Tessic said quietly. 11,000 years ago, someone did exactly that. Down on the surface, inside the ancient chamber, the woken sleeper, whose name, the machine slowly translated, was something close to Kessa, moved quickly through corridors that lit themselves ahead of her steps. Amara, and a handful of stunned scientists, following close behind. This vessel was never meant to fight alone, Kessa said as she walked, her voice growing steadier with every passing minute. It is one small part of something much larger. A system, built into this whole world, meant to protect it, meant to wake fully, only if the danger became great enough. Protect it from what? Amara asked, hurrying to keep pace. Kessa glanced back at her, something old and sad and proud all at once in her expression. From exactly what is happening in your sky right now, she said. We built this world's defenses long ago, after the wars that nearly destroyed us the first time. We slept to guard them, to wake only if they were ever truly needed again. It seems, she added, reaching a control chamber deep within the ship, lit now with soft, steady light, that the day has finally come. She placed her hands against a smooth, dark panel, and the entire ship shuddered gently, as though breathing out a long-held breath. Far above, on the quiet hand, Dune's reading spiked violently. Captain, he said, voice tight with disbelief. The planet's rotation just changed. Barely, but it changed. Something down there just adjusted Earth's spin, on purpose, using power drawn from deep within its own core. Tessic stared at her instruments, at numbers that should not have been possible, at a small blue world that had, only weeks before, seemed harmless and unaware, now revealing itself to be something built, guarded, and prepared, in ways no one, not the Combine, and perhaps not even most of humanity itself, had ever imagined. Above the deserts, the Ashcrest fleet's confident approach had turned into a desperate scramble to survive. Their weapons answered blow for blow by ancient defenses rising from ground the humans themselves had only recently learned to fear and wonder at in equal measure. And deep in the heart of the planet, something far larger than three buried ships had finally begun to stir, exactly as it had been built, so long ago, to do. Inside the ship beneath the desert, Kessa moved through the awakening corridors with growing purpose, her steps steadier now, her ancient tongue slowly finding its footing again, as the translation devices grew better at matching her words to modern human speech. Around her, the other newly woken sleepers began to stir as well, some sitting up slowly in their now open containers, blinking at the strange lights and strange faces surrounding them, others already standing, moving with the same quiet urgency that filled Kessa's every motion. They're remembering faster than I expected, Priya said quietly to Amara, watching one of the sleepers, a tall, silent man, who had woken only an hour earlier, already beginning to interact carefully with control panels along the chamber wall, his fingers finding switches and controls with the ease of long, buried memory, rather than new learning. It's like their bodies slept, but some part of their minds never fully forgot how all of this works. Trained instinct, Kessa said, overhearing the comment as she passed. We were prepared for this before we slept, prepared so deeply that the knowledge became part of us, not simply something we remembered, but something we simply knew. The way you know how to breathe without thinking about it. 11,000 years does not erase training that deep, not entirely. Above the desert, the battle raged on, and slowly, the shape of it became clear, even to those without training in space warfare. The ancient ships were not attacking blindly. Every strike, aimed precisely at engines, at weapon systems, at anything that reduced an enemy vessel's ability to fight without destroying the vessel outright. It was, Amara realized as she watched updates come in from military observers, almost gentle in its violence, as though whatever guided the defense system still remembered, even now, that unnecessary killing was not the point. They're being merciful, Ruban said, watching the same reports over Amara's shoulder. Even now, even under attack, Whatever built this thing is choosing not to kill more than it has to. Maybe that's the whole point of waiting 11,000 years to defend yourself, instead of simply attacking anyone who comes close, Amara said. Maybe whoever built this understood that fear alone isn't enough. That real strength means choosing carefully, even in the middle of a fight, what kind of world you want to be afterward. Above the atmosphere, Admiral Voss watched his fleet's steady retreat with a mixture of anger and grudging, uneasy respect. He had expected an easy conquest, a quick claim on old, powerful technology guarded by nothing more than time and forgotten stone. Instead, he found himself facing a defense system more disciplined, more precise, and more restrained than many fully modern combine fleets he had faced in his long career. "Send a final scan before we withdraw completely," he ordered Sorel, unwilling to leave without at least understanding exactly what had defeated him. "I want full data on that defense system's capabilities, everything we can gather before we're out of range." Sorel worked quickly, gathering what readings she could as the fleet pulled back toward the edge of the solar system. The data that came through only deepened the mystery further. Energy readings connected not just to the 3 buried ships, but running in complex patterns throughout the planet's crust and upper mantle, as though the entire world had been quietly modified, ages ago, into something far more than a simple ball of rock circling its star. "This isn't just a defense system built onto the planet," Sorel said, staring at her readings in open disbelief. "Admiral, I think the planet itself was modified, deliberately, a very long time ago. The ships we found are only the visible parts of something much larger, buried within the world's own structure." Voss absorbed this in grim silence. If true, it meant the Ashcrest fleet had not simply underestimated a young species with old ancestors. They had underestimated an entire engineered world, one shaped and prepared by minds capable of reworking a planet's own deep structure, for purposes even the Combine's oldest archives held no clear record of. "Get us home," he said finally, his voice quiet with the weight of what he now understood. "And prepare a full report for the Exploration Council. They need to know exactly what we found here, and exactly how wrong our assumptions about this world were." Back on the surface, as the last Ashcrest ships pulled away from Earth's orbit, cheering broke out among soldiers and scientists gathered at each of the 3 desert sites, the kind of relieved, disbelieving joy that comes only after surviving a danger too large to properly imagine beforehand. Amara found herself laughing and crying at the same time, hugging Farid and Reuben and Priya in turn, hardly able to believe that the small, quiet research station she had once run alone with a handful of colleagues now stood at the center of the most important event in human history. Kessa watched the celebration with a small, tired smile, standing slightly apart from the noise, her ancient eyes taking in the strange, modern world around her, the bright lights, the loud machines, the unfamiliar clothing worn by the very same species she had known, so long ago, in a much simpler form. "You did it," Amara said, coming to stand beside her once the first wave of celebration had settled. "Or rather, we did it, together. Your ship, your knowledge, and our willingness to dig deep enough to wake it in time. We only finished what was started a very long time ago," Kessa said quietly. "The true work is only just beginning. A world that was asleep to its own history cannot simply go back to sleep now that it is woken. There will be many hard questions ahead, questions about who we are, and who you have become in the time we slept, and how the 2 halves of the same story fit back together." Amara looked out over the desert, now lit by floodlights and the glow of celebration fires lit by relieved soldiers, and felt, for the first time in months, that despite every hard question still ahead, they had already survived the hardest part, the moment when the sky itself had turned against them, and the ground beneath their feet had risen up, at last, to answer. The battle over the deserts lasted less than an hour, but for everyone who lived through it, that hour felt like it stretched on forever. Admiral Voss watched his fleet break apart around him, one ship after another losing power, drifting, falling back from the planet's defenses in ragged retreat. The ancient system rising from Earth's depths did not seem interested in destroying the Ashcrest ships completely. Its strikes were precise, aimed at engines and weapons rather than at crew decks, as though something guiding it still remembered mercy, even after 11,000 years of sleep. "Admiral," Cyril said, her voice tight, "we are losing this fight badly. 2 ships are disabled. A third is barely holding together. If we press forward, we may lose everything." Voss stared at the screen showing Earth turning peacefully below, its ancient defenses glowing faintly along 3 points on its surface, calm and steady, even as they tore his fleet apart piece by piece. "Signal retreat," he said finally, the words heavy and bitter in his mouth. "Pull back. Full withdrawal." The remaining Ashcrest ships turned away from Earth, limping back toward the edge of the solar system, leaving behind a world they had come to conquer, and instead had barely escaped. It would take weeks for the battered fleet to reach a safe distance, and longer still for Voss to explain to Combined Command exactly how a species with barely any space technology had driven off an armed strike group with such humiliating ease. Aboard the Quiet Hand. Tessic watched the retreat with a strange, quiet relief. "They're leaving," Orn said, checking the fleet's trajectory again to be sure. "The Ashcrest ships are pulling out of the system. For now," Duan added carefully. "Captain, word of this will reach the Combine eventually, one way or another. Other factions will want to know what happened here. Some will be afraid. Some may be curious. A few, I think, will be even more determined to come and see this world for themselves." Tessic nodded slowly, watching the small blue planet below, its surface calm again, its ancient defenses settling back into a lower, watchful hum, rather than the full, blazing power they had shown during the battle. "Then it will not be our secret to keep any longer," she said. "But perhaps that is not entirely a bad thing. A world that can defend itself this well against a full strike group is not a world anyone should underestimate again." Down on the surface, in the deep chamber beneath the desert, Amara Osei stood beside Kessa as reports came in, confirming the alien retreat. Around them, the other sleepers who had woken during the battle sat quietly, some resting, some already asking careful questions about the strange, changed world they had returned to. "They're gone," Amara said, reading the update on a tablet handed to her by a breathless soldier. "The alien ships are retreating. We actually won." Kessa allowed herself a small, tired smile. "The system did what it was built to do," she said. "It was never meant to fight forever. Only long enough to make clear that this world is not defenseless, and never truly was, even during all the years it slept and forgot." "Why did we forget?" Amara asked, a question that had been building in her mind since the moment she first found the sleeping bodies in their clear containers. "If your people built all this, why didn't anyone remember? Why did it become nothing but old stories and myths?" Kessa was quiet for a moment, looking around the ancient chamber that had been her home for so many thousands of years of sleep. "Because remembering everything was too dangerous. Too soon," she said finally. "We built this system after wars that nearly ended us. Wars fought partly among ourselves and partly against outside dangers we barely survived. When it was finished, our leaders decided the knowledge of it should fade, slowly, over generations, so that no one group of our own people could misuse it, and so that our children could grow, and rebuild, and choose their own path forward, without the weight of old wars pressing on them constantly. Only the ships remembered fully. Only we, sleeping inside them, remembered fully. The rest of you were meant to carry only the shape of a promise, not the full truth, until a day like today, when the full truth became necessary again." Amara looked out through the chamber's opening, toward the desert sky above, now calm and empty of any threatening ships. "And now?" she asked. "What happens now?" Kessa considered the question carefully. "Now, your people know the truth, at least in part," she said. "Now, this world knows it was never as weak as it believed itself to be, and never entirely alone in guarding itself, even through all the centuries it thought it stood by itself against everything. That knowledge changes things. It should change things." In the days and weeks that followed, the world Amara had known before the alien fleet's arrival did not simply return to normal. It could not. Governments that had spent decades divided over old arguments now found themselves facing a much larger truth. The discovery of ancient ships, ancient defenses buried in the planet's deepest structure, and a small number of long-sleeping ancestors who remembered, in fragments, a history far older than anything written in any human book. News of the failed alien attack could not be kept entirely secret, not with orbital telescopes worldwide, having recorded parts of the battle, and not with so many governments and scientists, now aware of what lay beneath the deserts. Slowly, carefully, in stages meant to avoid mass panic, The truth was shared with the wider public. Humanity was not, and perhaps never truly had been, alone in the universe. And more than that, some part of humanity's own distant past had prepared, long ago, for exactly this kind of moment. Amara found herself, in the months that followed, working closely with Kessa and the other woken sleepers, helping translate old knowledge into forms modern scientists could understand, and helping the ancient survivors adjust, slowly, to a world both familiar and strange to them. It was difficult work, filled with as many quiet frustrations as quiet wonders, but Amara found in it a purpose deeper than any research project she had worked on before. Far above, in the quiet dark between worlds, Tessik's scout ship remained near Earth a while longer, watching the planet's slow, careful steps toward understanding its own hidden history. Eventually, orders came from a cautious, uncertain exploration council. Orders that reflected the confusion and careful interest spreading through parts of the wider Combine, now that word of the failed Ashcrest attack had begun to circulate. Maintain respectful distance. Open careful communication if the native species proves willing. This world's status is to be reconsidered. Recommend treating Sol 3 not as a simple young world, but as a protected world, whose true strength remains unknown, and should not be tested again without full understanding. Tessik read the message twice, then allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, something close to real relief. They're not sending another fleet, Orn said, reading over her shoulder. Not yet, Tessik said, and perhaps not for a long while. Word will spread slowly, carefully, the way important warnings often do among cautious old councils. For now, this world has bought itself time, real time, to grow, to prepare, to decide for itself how it wishes to meet the rest of us. Duin, still watching his endless streams of data from the world below, spoke quietly. Do you think they're ready for what comes next, for everything that's waiting out here, beyond their sky? Tessik looked down at the small blue planet, calm now, its cities glowing softly on the night side, its ancient defenses settled once more into careful, patient watchfulness deep beneath its deserts. I don't know, she admitted, but I think, whatever comes next, this is a world that will not be taken by surprise so easily again. It slept through 11,000 years of forgetting, and it still found a way to defend itself, when the moment finally came. That is not nothing. That is perhaps exactly the kind of quiet strength worth watching carefully, and worth respecting, rather than testing again. Weeks later, standing once more at the edge of the desert, Amara watched the sun set over land that looked, on the surface, almost exactly as it always had. Endless waves of sand, stretching toward a calm horizon. But she knew now what lay beneath that quiet, familiar sand. Ancient ships, ancient defenders, and a history far older and far stranger than anyone had imagined only a few short months before. Beside her, Kessa stood quietly, watching the same sunset with eyes that had seen this exact desert 11,000 years earlier. Before it had a name, before the people living on it now had built their cities, their nations, their long, complicated history of division and struggle and, eventually, unlikely unity, in the face of a threat from beyond their own sky. What do we do now? Amara asked softly, watching the last light fade over the dunes. Kessa was quiet for a long moment before answering. Now, she said, your people finish waking up. Not just the sleepers in these ships, but everyone, the whole world, remembering at last what it always quietly was. Not small, not weak, not alone, but simply waiting, all this time, for the right moment to stand up and be seen. Above them, the first stars of evening began to appear in the darkening sky, distant and silent, and for the first time since the whole strange, frightening, wonderful discovery had begun, Amara looked up at them without fear, and without doubt, but with something closer to quiet, steady hope, for herself, for the ancient sleepers now waking beside her, and for a whole world that had just learned, in the hardest way possible, exactly how much strength had been sleeping quietly beneath its feet all along. In the months that followed, the world slowly reshaped itself around the truth it had learned. Schools began teaching new lessons alongside the old ones, lessons about ancient ancestors and buried ships, and a defense system built into the planet's own deep structure. Old myths that had once been treated as simple bedtime stories were studied seriously for the first time, scholars combing through half-forgotten legends from every culture, searching for more fragments of memory that might help piece together exactly what had happened 11,000 years ago, and exactly why humanity's distant ancestors had chosen to bury their greatest works in sleep, rather than pass their knowledge down directly. Kessa and the small number of other woken sleepers became, almost against their will, some of the most important people on the planet, sought after by scientists, historians, and government leaders, eager to understand everything they could remember. It was not always an easy role for them. Kessa often grew tired of endless questions, tired of being treated as a living artifact rather than a person still adjusting to a world that had changed almost beyond recognition in the time she slept. "I did not sleep 11,000 years to become a museum exhibit," she said one afternoon, half amused and half frustrated, after a particularly long day of meetings with government officials, eager to learn everything she remembered about the ancient wars that had led to the ships being built and buried in the first place. "You're not an exhibit," Amara said, smiling despite herself. "You're just very interesting. Try to forgive us. We've spent our entire history wondering about exactly the kind of things you actually remember." Slowly, carefully, a new understanding began to form between the woken sleepers and the modern world around them. Kessa and the others were not simply sources of ancient knowledge to be studied and drained. They were people, with their own grief over a world that had moved on so far without them, their own wonder at the strange new inventions surrounding them, and their own hopes for what might come next, now that the long, careful waiting they had been trained for was finally over. Amara found herself growing close to Kessa over those months, an unlikely friendship built on long nights of quiet conversation, Kessa slowly teaching her fragments of the old language and the deeper history behind it, Amara in turn teaching Kessa about everything that had changed in the world during the long centuries of her sleep. New nations, new inventions, new ways of living that would have seemed like impossible magic to anyone from Kessa's own distant time. "Tell me about your wars," Kessa said one evening, as the two women sat together outside the research station, watching the desert stars appear one by one in the clear night sky. "Not to judge you, I only want to understand how much of what we tried to prevent, all those years ago, still found its way back into your history anyway." Amara told her honestly, holding nothing back. The long history of human conflict, the wars fought over land and belief and pride, the slow, difficult progress toward greater cooperation that had only truly accelerated in the face of the alien fleet's arrival. Kessa listened quietly, her expression unreadable in the dim starlight. "We hoped sleeping this knowledge away would give you room to grow without our old mistakes weighing you down," Kessa said finally. "It seems you found plenty of new mistakes to make on your own instead." "Maybe that's just what growing up looks like," Amara said. "Whether you remember everything your ancestors did, or forget almost all of it, people still have to learn some lessons for themselves, the hard way, before they really believe them." Far above, Tessik's scout ship remained in careful, respectful orbit for several more months, watching as humanity took its first uncertain steps into a truly changed understanding of itself. Cautious signals passed occasionally between the quiet hand and certain trusted human officials. Careful early conversations meant to test whether real communication between the two species might someday be possible, conducted with patience on both sides, mindful of how badly the earlier encounter with the Ashcrest fleet had gone. "They're careful," Doohan reported one day, after another slow, careful exchange of simple information between his ship and a small team of human scientists specially chosen for the task. "Careful, but curious too. I think they want to understand us as much as we want to understand them." "Good," Tessik said. "Caution mixed with curiosity is exactly the right balance for a first real conversation between worlds. Better that than either blind fear or blind trust." Eventually, word of Earth's strange, powerful ancient history spread slowly through wider Combine space, carried by nervous reports from the battered Ashcrest fleet and careful, more measured accounts from the Exploration Council. Reactions varied widely, just as Doohan had predicted. Some factions grew wary, treating the newly revealed planet as a place best left alone, respected from a careful distance. Others grew intensely curious, eager to learn more about a species that had defended itself so effectively, despite outward appearances of technological weakness. A few, quietly, began making their own plans to visit Earth someday, not with warships, but with careful, respectful diplomatic missions, hoping to build the kind of relationship that Voss's aggressive strike group had made impossible. Back on Earth, Amara stood one final time at the edge of the Great Desert, many months after the battle that had changed everything. The excavation site had grown, over time, into something closer to a permanent research center, staffed now by scientists and engineers from every corner of the world, working together on projects that would have seemed like pure fantasy only a year earlier. Kessa stood beside her, dressed now in simple modern clothing, though she still carried herself with the same quiet, steady bearing she had shown from the very first moment she woke. "Do you ever wish you could go back to sleep?" Amara asked, only half joking. "Back to a simpler time, before all of this?" Kessa considered the question seriously, watching the desert wind stir small clouds of sand across the dunes in the fading evening light. "No," she said finally. "I slept long enough. I would rather be awake for whatever comes next, even if it is difficult, even if it is uncertain, than sleep through it, and wonder, forever, what I missed." Amara smiled, understanding the feeling completely. She thought of everything that had happened since that first strange scan, months ago, when her simple survey equipment had first picked up a shape too large and too old to make any sense. The fear, the wonder, the desperate scramble to prepare, the battle in the sky, and now, slowly, carefully, the long, difficult work of building something new out of everything they had learned. Humanity had spent its whole known history believing itself young, small, and largely alone in a vast and silent universe. Now it knew better. It knew it carried within its own deep past a strength it had long forgotten, buried like the ships themselves beneath layers of time and myth, waiting only for the right moment to rise again. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, filled with new questions and new challenges no one could yet fully predict, Amara found, standing there in the cooling desert evening beside a woman who had slept 11,000 years for exactly this moment, that she was not afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. In the same quiet, patient, stubborn way, the whole waiting world beneath her feet had always been ready, long before anyone, human or otherwise, had ever thought to look closely enough to notice.